Hi, everyone. Today I will be presenting on Cycles of Survival, the Speculative Ecological Prison of Rainworld. A little bit about myself before we begin. I'm a Canadian composer currently studying in my PhD of music composition at McGill University. But I also have a keen interest in game design and video games more generally, which brought me to this particular topic. All right, so introduction. Brainworld is a survival platformer game released in 2017, in which players navigate a post-apocalyptic world as a slugcat, pictured here, attempting to survive a hostile environment. The gameplay experience is cyclical. Players spawn, hunt for food, explore, and take shelter from lethal downpours, repeating each step to progress in a hostile environment. So here's a summary of what I'll be exploring in this presentation. I'll be examining how the gameplay loop, aka the player experience, connects with the fictional ecosystem of the game to create ecological awareness within the player. This ecological awareness acts to decenter the human subject and enables a larger view of our role in a system of entangled relationships, basically how we relate to our environment. So I'll next be introducing a bunch of core terms. So this is the first of three. Eco-anxiety. So eco-anxiety, according to Picala, describes sensations of distress around the fear of a compounding ecological crisis. This encompasses uncertainty, unpredictability, and uncontrollability in the face of climate change. The enormity of this threat is difficult to understand for us, but eco-anxiety, when it's translated into a fictional medium, may be more easily perceived on a human scale. So what exactly is speculative ecology? What exactly is fictional environments? As defined by Ben Lockwood, speculative ecology describes a fictional environment, one that redefines and reviews the relationship between human and nature. These fictional environments are constructed through world building and creating unique worlds that differ from our own but still reflect our human world in some way or other. While many fictional video game worlds tackle humans' place in post-apocalyptic worlds, such as The Last of Us, it may also feature landscapes in which humans are absent, and the actions of animals and plants enable speculation about the under-the-surface consciousness of nature. Lockwood also argues that the production of fictional natures is inherently political, drawing from our cultural and social human issues. So from this, and from speculative ecology, arises an awareness of our ecological crisis and an awareness of humanity's larger place within this natural system. And so how exactly can we understand our place in a larger system? Well, this is where posthumanism comes in. Posthumanism, as explored by Rosie Berdati and Carrie Wolf, decenters the autonomous human subject, recognizing them as fundamentally entangled within their environment. Humans are not the sole beings capable of acting. Instead, agency is distributed across a whole system of human and non-human entities. In Rainworld, speculative ecology expresses posthumanism through world building, complex creature AI, and catastrophic weather events. The player is immersed within this environment, within the environment of Rainworld, and this is an environment in which they become but one of many creatures. All right, so here's the flow for the presentation and what we'll be going through. First, I will examine how cycles in the game operate simultaneously as gameplay structure, ecological system, and effective experience through recursive learning. Then, I will highlight eco-anxiety and resonances of human issues within the game's world to examine the environment as backdrop, resource, and antagonist. The culmination of these reflections will showcase the eco-critical implications of Rainworld through the lens of posthumanism and how ecological awareness is birthed within the player. All right, so that brings me to my first section, besides the introduction, which is cyclical gameplay as ecological structure. So, the gameplay loop of Rainworld, which I've discussed briefly in the introduction, is here. So you can see that on screen with the little diagram. So a gameplay loop describes the repetitive actions that a player takes throughout the course of the game. In Rainworld, the player follows this cycle: find food, explore, avoid enemies, and hibernate. This repetition creates a temporal cycle for the player. Even upon death, the player is subsumed back into the struggle against the environment, continuing from their last hibernation. Survival in this game remains temporary, such that the prey, the slugcat, must always continue to move and continue to struggle, always caught within this repeating cycle. The lethal rain in Rain World organizes the world's temporality, initiating and ending each in-game cycle. So after a certain amount of time in the game, the rain will arrive and flood the environment. And this is a timer that ticks at the start of every single cycle. So once the slugcat emerges from hibernation, the only way to survive the rain is to shelter in safe spaces away from the catastrophic weather overhead. The storm and its enormous impact on all life in Rain World defies a stable world, continually upturning it in a cyclical manner. This rain and its significance aligns with the concept of a hyperobject, according to Tim Morton, who also came up with the idea of the hyperobject. A hyperobject explores things that are distributed so massively in time and space that they avoid full human perception and knowledge. Hyperobjects feature several key characteristics. The first is viscosity. The object cannot be escaped. The second is non-locality. No single place contains the whole object. And interobjectivity. The object itself emerges through a relationship of many entities together. In this way, the rain in Rain World acts exactly like a hyperobject, appearing as an overwhelming system that affects all life on the planet and cannot be wholly perceived. It seems to be this force that exists beyond the player's control. I will note many instances during my own playtime of this game where I dashed for shelter and found many other creatures equally hiding within the shelters. So the rain doesn't only affect the player, but affects everything in the environment. The downpour is pervasive and unavoidable, with each cycle in-game defined by its arrival and disappearance. So in this way, the gameplay loop in Rain World is defined by ecological pressure. Alright, so now we get to death, rebirth, and recursive learning. In contrast to many other games, the cycle in Rain World emphasizes learning the environment rather than directly increasing in power. In many other video games, players gain experience points, especially in, role-playing games, for example. And these experience points can be used to power up their skills and allow them to fight more challenging creatures. But this is not how it works with Rain World. So as, again, drawing from my own example playing the game, in my first hour of playing Rain World, I would frequently be devoured by pole plants, this red plant creature over here. It's kind of like a Venus flytrap that blends into the environment and catches you unaware. So I kept dying to the same pole plant. I would die, be reborn, and be eaten again by the same creature. Eventually, I realized that I could throw rocks to stun these plants and sneak by them while they reeled from shock. So the slugcat itself did not get stronger through this encounter, but rather I learned how to avoid this instance of the pole plant to progress and survive the upcoming rainfall. Progress here in this way is recursive. The player accumulates ecological knowledge through vulnerability and exposure to environmental danger. And furthermore, the gameplay loop encourages a heightened awareness of the rhythms and behaviors of a larger interconnected system. The gameplay loop here produces an experiential understanding of ecological precarity. All right, and now we get into the next section, which explores resonances of human in an alien environment. So as discussed in the introduction, human ecological issues are embedded into the environment of Rain World. And to this end, and to show that, I draw from Benjamin Abraham and 𝗔𝗯𝘀𝘁𝗿, who expose the connection between our physical human world and the virtual world of video games. They propose 4 conceptual categories to understand these virtual environments, and I will be highlighting 3 of them in regards to Rain World. So the first is as a backdrop, so environment as a backdrop, in which the environment is an empty space in which action takes place. Environment as resource, so exploiting these resources to progress in the game. And environment as antagonist, so an obstacle that competes with the player. They also have a 4th category called text, which I will not be highlighting in this presentation. All right, so backdrops. In Rain World, the pixelized scenery of the world forms a scenic, dystopian backdrop. The player travels through 12 regions, such as the outskirts, the industrial complex, the drainage system, and the garbage wastes. Each environment has its own music, color palette, atmosphere, and mix of creatures. Dystopian environments like this invite the player to consider a world in which humanity has ceased to exist or exists in a reduced technological state compared to our current standards. While traversing this virtual environment, the player experiences anxiety from imagining the loss within these circumstances and the eco-trauma resulting from this ecology. These environments reflect tropes and fears of humans in science fiction works, such as pollution and the garbage wastes, and in the industrial complex, the fear of ever-advancing technology that produces that pollution. Alrighty, now we get to resources. So there are three primary categories of resources in Rain World. There's food, weapons, and tools. Food enables the slugcat to survive. So this is something like berries or bat flies, these little bats that fly around that you can grab and eat. Then you have weapons such as spears, rocks. These enable the player to progress without perishing, to ward off creatures such as that pole plant that I mentioned earlier. And then we also have tools which provide additional support, such as lanterns, which allow you to light up darker areas. Resources are the most important dynamic in this ecology. The slugcat is a forager that must search the corners and crevices to survive, avoiding both enemies and the rain. Unlike many survival games, Rain World does not frame ecology as a resource management system for human mastery. Instead, the player is prey, vulnerable, and ecologically entangled within a larger system, scavenging and foraging. Each of these objects, food, weapons, and tools, are deeply intertwined with our own human experience. Our primal fears of hunger and predators are reflected here, and the only way to progress is to meet our necessities. All right, so let's talk about the antagonists. So the environment of Rain World presents the player with two primary antagonists, creatures and the rain. Creatures in the game come in all shapes and sizes, from lizards to centipedes to leviathans. On screen, I've got a picture of a bunch of different lizards. These creatures have remarkably advanced AI, so they have their own patterns of emerging from hibernation, hunting, moving around the environment, etc. So yeah, they hunt and traverse the environment with procedurally animated limbs. Notably, these creatures are not solely focused on killing the slugcat when compared to so many other games with enemies. For example, they do hunt each other, and within my own experience of the game, the pole plant also devoured several other lizards pictured on screen there. The main foe, however, is the rain. As I mentioned in the gameplay loop section, it occurs on a continual cycle, forcing the player to run and hide whenever it appears. In our current world, catastrophic weather events cause droughts and floods, damaging food sources and forcing humans to shelter. These weather events stand in opposition to human agency, displaying their own eerie sense of sentience. All right, so that brings us to the culmination of what we've been talking about, the eco-critical implications. So the first thing is this erosion of human exceptionalism. The speculative ecology of Rain World acts as a critique of human-centric assumptions regarding control, progress, and survival. In posthumanism, the human is no longer categorically distinct from the non-human world and is instead embedded directly within its systems. As a result, our human experience emerges from interactions with non-human entities in our environment rather than solely determined by us. In my time playing Rain World, I found myself caught in a slow cycle of progress, and this game certainly did not play out as a power fantasy. Instead, I was unexceptional, only another creature attempting to survive in a threatening landscape in which my survival was all but secured. It was only after dozens of deaths and rebirths that I began to understand the game's systems and progress in the world. This cycle of death and rebirth, of rainstorm and calm, reinforces the post-human framing, as the player's knowledge emerges through learning the relationships between creatures and the lethal downpours. So what about eco-critical awareness? So the cyclical nature of the gameplay, ecology, and player experience is central to this critique. The repeated loop of emergence, survival, catastrophe, and renewal reflects a world managed by precarity. Survival depends upon recognizing the relationships within the world rather than transcendence over other in-game entities. In other words, we must work with nature, understand it, or else be trapped in a continual violent cycle. Here, Rain World exemplifies how video games can function as eco-critical media that renders an environmental crisis effectively legible in our world overwhelmed by information and, us being overwhelmed by what's happening. Our own world is increasingly ravaged by freak weather events, including earthquakes, tornadoes, floods, etc. These weather events, and their impact on the world are reflected in all aspects of Rain World, including the environment and the gameplay. Notably, the idea of the rain continually disrupting the natural environment. Through this structure, the game erodes human-centered notions of progress and foregrounds adaptation and vulnerability as an ecological reality, presented to the player through lived experience. And that brings me to the conclusion. So in conclusion, Rain World demonstrates how video games can model ecology through the embodied structure of play. Through its cyclical gameplay loop of foraging, exploring, avoiding enemies, and hibernating, the game situates the player within a hostile, speculative ecosystem that questions human exceptionalism. Rather than progressing linearly, players must continually adapt to an environment governed by looping scarcity and perpetual catastrophe. Resonances of eco-anxiety are found in the environment of the game, present in the backdrops, resources, and antagonists. As a result, the game transforms cyclical repetition into an ecological experience that mirrors eco-anxieties tied to the current unfolding climate crisis. The game rejects human-centric notions and instead emphasizes interdependence and ecological precarity. The player is but one entity in the speculative ecological prism. Thanks so much for watching this presentation. I hope you enjoyed, and I look forward to receiving questions about the source material. Thank you.